Hey guys, tonight we begin in a strange place, your memory. You're sitting in a dimly lit classroom, or maybe hunched over a glowing screen. There's a list of words in front of you: apple, book, pen. Someone is repeating them out loud with a strange rhythm. You mouth the words back, half unsure if you're learning English or summoning a very polite demon. You probably won't survive this because learning English, the real kind, the kind you can use, isn't about memorizing polite nouns. It's about stepping into chaos, into double meanings, weird exceptions, and accents so thick you wonder if you misclicked the language. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and what time it is where you are. I love knowing where my late night learners are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with one word, maybe hello, maybe dog. It's small. It doesn't bite. You think, okay, I got this. But quickly, that word drags another with it. Good dog. Bad dog. Your dog is cute. Suddenly, your brain is juggling pronouns, adjectives, and verb conjugations, and you were just trying to talk about a dog. English has this way of being deceptively simple, like a calm lake hiding a whole ecosystem underneath. The alphabet is friendly, no accents on the letters. The verbs don't have wild endings like in Spanish or Italian, but then you find out there are over 1 million English words, and people are inventing more daily. Shakespeare himself added about 1,700 words to the language. The man was basically the human version of Urban Dictionary. And speaking of chaos, English was never meant to be this global beast. It's a patchwork made from the loot of history, Latin from the Romans, Germanic roots from early settlers, French influence after the Norman invasion. Even Sanskrit left a little fingerprint here and there. Historians still argue whether English is a Germanic language with Latin flavor, or just a linguistic accident that got famous. So when you say your first English word, you're actually stepping into a living timeline. That hello connects you to a long chain of speakers, traders, invaders, poets, travelers, each tweaking the language a little to suit their needs. No wonder it's a mess. But let's go back to your first word. Think about how weird it felt, the shape of it in your mouth. Maybe your native language doesn't have that sound. Maybe it felt silly. Maybe you laughed. That's good. Laughter is a language teacher's best friend. When you can laugh at how strange a word feels, you remember it better. There's a quirky study from the University of Nottingham that found we retain humorous phrases better than neutral ones. Your brain loves a little absurdity. Let's not ignore the reality. In that first stage of learning, you feel dumb. Everyone does. You hear native speakers talk, and it sounds like they're swallowing marbles at 100 words per minute. You think, I'll never understand this. But you will, because right now, your brain is setting traps. It's planting seeds of pattern recognition. It's quietly noticing things. The way S usually makes things plural. The way ed often signals the past. You're not even aware of it, but the machine is starting to hum. And then it happens. The first time you understand something in English without translating. Maybe it's a joke in a movie. Maybe it's a song lyric. Maybe someone says, nice shirt, and you don't have to pause before responding. That feeling, that's your first real win. No applause, no fireworks, but your brain quietly high fives itself. This is fluency in microdose form. And as you go deeper, you'll meet strange companions. Phrasal verbs, idioms, sarcasm. You'll learn that break a leg doesn't mean injury, that what's up doesn't want a literal answer, that I'm fine sometimes means the opposite. And somehow, that starts to make sense. English will frustrate you, betray you, trip you with false friends, like actually, which doesn't mean atualmente in Portuguese, or sensible, which doesn't mean sensitive in Spanish. These words are linguistic trolls, but eventually you'll learn to laugh, step over them, and move on. And remember, the people who speak perfect English, they don't exist. Even native speakers Google grammar rules sometimes. Even English professors misuse affect and effect. The real goal isn't perfection, it's connection. If someone understands you, you've already won. So, yes, you started with one word, but that word was the door. Now you're inside, and the whole house of English is yours to explore. You'll trip over the furniture, open the wrong cabinets, maybe get stuck in the bathroom of prepositions for a while. But slowly, room by room, it becomes home. Now that you've stepped inside the house of English, let's talk about the voices echoing down its hallways, because you'll quickly realize something unsettling. English doesn't sound like one voice. It sounds like 20 or 50 or 100, all arguing over how to say the word schedule. That brings us to your next confusing, frustrating, and, let's be honest, kind of hilarious lesson: accents. You meet someone from London. They sound like the Queen. Then someone from Manchester says, "I up, love," and you wonder if you need subtitles. Then you turn on a show from Texas and hear, "Y'all fixin' to go?" Suddenly, you're not sure if you're learning one language or three. This is where most learners panic. You think, I studied English for years and I still can't understand that guy from Birmingham. But here's the good news. Even native speakers struggle with each other's accents. Americans get lost in thick Scottish brogues. Australians sometimes have to slow down for Brits. There are parts of Ireland where even the Irish need a translator. Historians still argue whether English fractured so much because of colonization, local dialect survival, or just general chaos. Probably all three. But accents are more than just funny sounds. They're identity, pride, home. And when you start tuning your ear to them, you realize English is less like one song and more like a playlist. Slang plays into this too. Imagine you walk into a shop in New York and say, "I'd like a rubber, please." In the UK, that means eraser. In the US, well, you just got weird looks. You meant to erase something, not prevent pregnancy. These little traps are where the real comedy begins. And the learning. Take cheeky, a word beloved in British English. A cheeky pint means slipping off for a quick beer, usually when you're supposed to be doing something else. It's charming, rebellious in the most British way possible. Americans don't really use it. Say cheeky in Ohio, and people might think you're insulting someone. And then there's bloody. In Britain, it's mild emphasis. It's bloody cold out. In American English, sounds like you just walked off a horror set. Same language, different planets. You'll also notice how rhythm changes. American English tends to stretch vowels. Assume. British English keeps things tight. Brill. Australian English, it practically wrestles the vowels to the ground. G'day. How you going? Here's the secret. Accents and slang aren't obstacles. They're shortcuts to fluency. Why? Because they teach you what textbooks don't. They show you how real people really speak in all their messy glory. No one walks into a coffee shop and says, "May I please purchase one caffeinated beverage?" They say, "Can I grab a coffee?" If you want to understand native speakers and be understood in return, you have to live in that casual, slang-filled zone. That's why I always recommend learners watch local YouTubers, not just language teachers. You'll hear filler words, jokes, sarcasm, and yes, accents so thick they could butter your toast. It'll feel overwhelming at first, like your ears are underwater, but eventually your brain will adapt. Like a muscle, it stops trying to translate and starts recognizing rhythm. And suddenly that guy from Liverpool, you get the gist. That girl from Melbourne, you're catching every other word. That's progress. Here's a quirky linguistic tidbit. Some linguists believe that humans can adjust to new speech patterns in just 3 days of immersion. Your brain is more flexible than you think. It's designed to tune in, even if at first it feels like static. Still, there are practical tricks. Want to understand an accent? Mimic it. Not perfectly, not offensively. Just try shaping the sounds. It's not about acting. It's about tuning your own instrument. Your mouth, tongue, breath, they're tools. Adjust them, and suddenly, water sounds less like wada and more like wata or depending on which coast you're surfing. Let's not ignore the elephant in the room. You will get laughed at, or corrected, or both. You'll say something with the wrong rhythm or meaning, and it'll sting. But here's the fun part. When you mess up in English, it's almost always funny. Like the time I overheard a student say, "I'm very exciting," when they meant, "I'm very excited," which is a very different message. Or the learner who said, "I'm going to kill time with my friend," and got very strange looks. They meant hang out, relax. These are not failures. They're stories. They're proof you're engaging with the language instead of just studying it from a distance. Because the goal isn't to speak perfect English. The goal is to speak human English, English that has accent and slang and jokes and the occasional oops. So when you hear someone say "in it" or "dead good" or "he's proper fit," don't panic. Smile. Your ears are learning a new dialect of the same language, and the more of them you learn, the more fluent, not just in English, but in humanity, you become. Now that your ears are beginning to accept the delicious madness of accents and slang, it's time to tackle the next beast lurking in the shadows, grammar. You've probably been told that grammar is the skeleton of a language, that it holds everything together, that without it, you're just grunting syllables at people and hoping they guess your meaning, which is technically true, but also deeply misleading. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't actually follow grammar rules, at least not the way textbooks want you to think they do. You learn that whom is the correct object form of who. Then you listen to native speakers and realize almost no one says whom unless they're trying to sound like a 19th century vampire. You're taught that double negatives are incorrect. But then a song goes, "I can't get no satisfaction," and it becomes a cultural anthem. You study subject-verb agreement like it's a sacred ritual, only to hear someone blurt out, "There's lots of people here," and not get struck by lightning. This is where grammar becomes more like a haunted museum. All these grand rules, dusty and formal, sit on polished pedestals. And meanwhile, the living language outside is throwing paint on the walls and dancing in the lobby. Historians still argue whether formal grammar rules were ever truly reflective of natural speech, or if they were just invented by academics desperate to make English behave like Latin. Spoiler: English is the rebellious teenager of the language family. It doesn't want to sit still. That doesn't mean grammar is useless. It's more like road signs. They help you get where you're going, but they don't control the car. You do. So when your textbook says, do not split infinitives, and then you hear someone say, to boldly go where no one has gone before, you get to smile. That's a grammar sin, a glorious, poetic, legendary one. And it worked. Let's talk about the dreaded tenses. English has 12 of them technically: past, present, future, and all their overly ambitious cousins. Present perfect, future continuous, past perfect progressive passive while standing on one leg. Okay, that last one isn't real, but it feels like it should be. Textbooks love to separate these tenses like museum exhibits, but in real life, they bleed into each other. You say, I've been working, not because you memorized the present perfect continuous tense, but because it just feels right. And yet, when you're first learning, nothing feels right. You second guess everything. Is it have eaten or ate? You pause mid-sentence to calculate the timeline in your head like a time-traveling lawyer. Okay, if the action started in the past and is still happening but may have just ended, let's stop the madness for a second. Here's a secret. Native speakers mix up tenses all the time, especially when they're telling stories. Watch any podcast. You'll hear people start in the past tense, shift to present, and jump back again without blinking. So I was walking down the street, and this guy comes up to me and says, "That's not a grammar fail. That's storytelling rhythm. It makes the moment feel alive." Still, grammar can be helpful, especially when it's treated like a tool, not a judge. Knowing the difference between I live here and I've lived here for 10 years gives you control over nuance. But you don't need to master all the rules before you speak. In fact, some learners get stuck in grammar jail. They memorize rules endlessly, but never open their mouth. They fear mistakes. They're waiting to be ready. But English isn't a piano recital. You don't need to hit every note. You need to make sound. Mistakes are the melody of learning. There's a quirky anecdote about a famous linguist who learned Spanish by deliberately saying the wrong thing just to see how people reacted. He learned faster by breaking rules than by studying them. I'm not saying go out and massacre grammar on purpose, but don't worship it either. In fact, many grammar rules have exceptions so ridiculous they're basically myths. Take I before E except after C. Seems simple until you hit words like weird, science, or neighbor. It's less a rule and more of a suggestion from someone who once lost a spelling bee and never recovered. Then there's the whole don't end a sentence with a preposition rule. Guess what? That came from 17th century Latin fanboys trying to make English more respectable. But in modern English, saying, "That's what I'm talking about," sounds way more natural than, "That is about what I am talking." One sounds like a human. The other sounds like a malfunctioning robot. You'll also notice grammar changing over time. Languages evolve. They is now accepted as a singular pronoun. Ain't shows up in dictionaries. Emojis might be the next punctuation. The grammar police are losing ground. And maybe that's a good thing, because the heart of English isn't perfect structure, it's human connection. If someone understands you, even if your verb tense wobbled a bit, you're speaking successfully. So instead of obsessing over every little rule, focus on patterns. English runs on patterns. Notice how people use the language, not just how the book says they should. Over time, your instincts will take over. You'll feel when something's off. You'll self-correct mid-sentence, and your grammar will sharpen not from rules, but from rhythm. So go ahead, split that infinitive. Use ain't if the moment feels right. End your sentence with a preposition you're comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, fluent English isn't about grammar perfection. It's about making mistakes boldly enough to grow. You've survived grammar, barely. Your brain is now a tangled knot of tenses and exceptions. But let's pause the theory and get brutally practical. Because no matter how many rules you memorize, it means nothing if you freeze the moment someone starts speaking to you. Tonight, we talk about listening without panic, a skill every learner fantasizes about, but secretly dreads. Here's how it usually goes. You're in line at a cafe. A friendly barista looks up and says something that sounds like, "Hiya, wanna get?" You blink. Your brain short circuits. Your internal translator goes on strike. Was that even English? Yes, it was. Probably, "Hi, what do you want to get?" Spoken at native speed and chewed into a smoothie of syllables. And you're not alone. This happens to every learner. You think, "I studied for years and I understood none of that." The moment your ears are hit with real unscripted English, it's like being thrown into a swimming pool before you learn how to float. But here's the first truth of surviving English listening. You don't have to understand every word. In fact, most native speakers don't understand every word, especially when talking to fast speakers, people with thick accents, or during loud conversations. We all guess. We all use context. We all read faces, tone, gestures. You can too. The key is to stop chasing precision and start embracing the gist. When someone says, "We're going to head out around quarter after," you don't need to understand every syllable of "gonna head out." You hear quarter after, glance at the clock, and guess they're leaving soon. Boom, communication achieved. Historians still argue whether early humans developed language primarily for hunting coordination or just to gossip more efficiently. Either way, we've always used context to fill in blanks. English isn't a puzzle, it's a negotiation. So how do you train your ear to negotiate? First, ditch the subtitles. Not forever, but at least part of the time. Subtitles are like language training wheels. They help you feel secure, but they also trap you into reading instead of listening. Try watching a show you already know, like Friends or The Office, without subtitles. You know what's happening. Let your ears work. Second, listen to real conversations, not scripted dialogues. Language learning apps are great, but no one actually says, "Hello, my name is John. I am going to the supermarket." What you'll hear in real life is more like, "Hey, I'm just gonna run out real quick. You want anything?" You can train for this chaos. Start with YouTube vloggers, podcasts, street interviews. Listen without expecting to understand everything. Pick out a few words, guess the meaning, Pause, rewind, laugh at your mistakes, keep going. And if you're in a real life conversation, cheat politely. Don't be afraid to say, "Sorry, could you say that again? A bit slower? Did you mean? I'm still learning. Can you explain?" These phrases aren't weakness, they're strategy. They buy you time. They help your brain breathe. Let me tell you a fringe tidbit. There's a technique called shadowing, used by simultaneous interpreters and language ninjas. You listen to native audio and repeat at the same time, not after, while it's playing. It feels impossible at first, like your mouth is betraying your ears. But give it a week. It rewires your brain to listen and speak simultaneously, just like native speakers do. You stop translating. You start reacting. And then there's intonation, music hiding inside speech. English isn't just about words. It's about how those words feel. You're coming. You're coming. You're coming. Same words, three meanings. The melody carries the message. Start mimicking this music. Not just the sounds, but the emotion. When someone says, "Oh, really?" with raised eyebrows, you copy the tone, not just the phrase. This is how your ears evolve. And let's address panic, because panic is the true villain here. You panic because you expect to understand everything, because you think if you don't catch every word, you've failed. You haven't. You've just made a human mistake in a second language. That's called being awesome.